I would define the term AI roaming as the ability to have multiple separate environments that can effectively hand off to each other. So you could have a live session in one location, and that live session then needs to hand over to a separate entity that's not directly related, but there needs to be a method of handing over the session and being able to charge for that usage. In the same way that telcos used to do data roaming for networks, where you would go to another country and you'd get a text message saying you're now roaming on somebody else's network. AI roaming is kind of the same concept, but will be seamless. And that's the beauty of it. You wouldn't know, it would just be automatic. It's becoming part of the AI infrastructure conversation because the way that environments now work, you need to be able to have a live session for, say for instance, a ChatGPT instance, where you're going to have a live session of all the history of the conversation that you have. That is going to become more and more important as always-on inferencing is working. The example would be a wearable device that monitors things that you see, things that you hear, questions that you ask. If you move from one location to another and that device forgets everything you just said, it's not particularly useful. But if you have that device and it can share that information between multiple locations as you move, then that makes things a lot easier. And it makes it more engaging. So the device remembers you. The device remembers you feel more connected to it, you use it more regularly. The companies that provide their services make more money, but you get a more enriched service. And that's the key point. Always on inferencing is going to require an enriched service. And so roaming becomes a requirement. So the application is just an endpoint that retrieves the memory. The memory is always going to be either in the network or in a server room somewhere. And so that device could possibly hold all of that memory inside it. The cost for that device would be insane. You'd have gigabytes upon gigabytes worth of data just carried around with you. So instead, what you do is you have a really powerful endpoint that can contact the network. That application contacts the network retrieves the data, and that data then follows you wherever you go. With always on, always inferencing, that is going to be the de facto mechanism. And the low latency is really important because you could have a robotics system that requires 5 milliseconds of latency because the risk if it gets it wrong, somebody could get hurt. That means it needs to be the most low latency access point, no matter what. If that robot is, you could say a car, for instance, the further and further the car gets away, the longer and longer the latency becomes, the more important it is to have a really low latency connection because you don't want the car to crash. And so the memory of that becomes really important to have low latency roaming so it gets to the next nearest point and keeps the response low. The technologies that will allow AI as a distributed service to work and roaming to work are based around predominantly networking to join locations together, and then to have orchestration and handoffs to allow sessions to be carried between locations. Those handoffs need to have functions such as billing. They need to have functions such as being able to track the amount of usage that's being used. And they need to be able to synchronize the data between those locations. That's going to be where software will abstract away complexity so that people don't even notice it. It feels like magic. But in the background, there's going to be lots of software that makes that happen. The closest analogy I would say is still telephone company roaming, where you went from one location to another location, you automatically get a text message saying you're now roaming in this country. And that's the key point, right? Is that low latency AI inferencing at this kind of scale in a distributed net manner is transformative. It will provide functionality that nothing else could provide. If you have real-time inferencing, you can unlock things like live translation without ever having to wait for it. The main advice I'd probably give them to start to think about, if they're a kind of a globally distributed environment and a globally distributed enterprise, is where they need the data. It is now becoming fundamentally easier to shift the compute to the data as opposed to shifting the data to the compute. For globally distributed kind of enterprises, sovereignty becomes really important because you want to make sure that your data is protected, especially if it's super valuable, which AI data is going to become much more valuable. So encryption in flight, encryption at rest. Going forwards, quantum protection, or things like financial data, they're going to become super important.